Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Multifamily Monday. My name is Jesse Greer and I am the Vice President of Investments in Multifamily at Avis & Young here in Northern Nevada. And today I have a very special guest with me, Geneva Martinkus. Geneva, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. So we're going to have another fun episode here talking about seller financing, alternative financing. And Geneva is here because she has a company that consists of 4 different arms, right? It's Allied 1031 Exchange, Allied Loan Servicing, Allied Trustee Services, and Nevada Construction Management.
That is correct.
You got a handful going on
Yes.
there. Never a dull moment right now, right?
Never.
So the reason why Geneva is here is because she's going to talk to us about really what options are for 1031 exchange services and how they relate to sellers that decide to do seller financing. But Geneva, before I jump into that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and a little bit about each one of these companies that you have.
Goodness. So I've been in the business since 1980. Worked for a company for about 24 years and did exactly the 3, not the construction control, but loan servicing, exchanges, and foreclosures until 2006 when I went out and opened Allied on my own.
Congratulations.
Thank
So I'm
you.
assuming it was with a traditional escrow and title company where you did these same exact
Yes,
services.
exactly.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow. So that is a lot of experience behind Geneva right now. So I'm very excited to hear what you have to say about this. So let's kind of jump into the conversation itself. 1031 exchanges. I think there's a misperception from a seller's perspective that if they were to seller finance a property, right, in other words, have a potential buyer/borrower carry paper, that they cannot 1031 exchange at all. Is that true?
That is not true. That
So,
is not true.
so talk to us about that. How does that work then, and what does one need to be conscientious about when they're doing this?
So you can take a note and deed of trust and pay the taxes when principal and interest is paid down on that. You can just take that and do a partial exchange, or you can make it payable to the exchange company and then make it liquid. So you can bring in your own cash to pay for it, or another note buyer to bring in cash to the exchange, buy the note, we assign it to whoever purchases it, and now your exchange is liquid. Or you can take that note and deed of trust and use it in your purchase offer.
And what does that mean?
That means that if you're going to write up an agreement and the seller will accept the note and deed of trust as part of the purchase price, then we assign it over to them.
Fascinating. So you could actually take the note and deed of trust and use that as part of your purchasing power, I guess.
Right, exactly.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a specific scenario, right? Let's say we have a property that is in contract for $2 million,
Okay.
right? Let's say a buyer comes in with 50% down, so they have $1 million to bring to escrow.
Okay.
You decide to carry paper on the remaining 50% or $1 million,
Yes.
right? Let's talk about it from the scenario that you discussed where you're carrying paper, but you're using the proceeds to purchase the upleg property or the replacement property.
Right.
Okay, so walk us through that scenario again.
So in either scenario where you're going to make it liquid or use it for your next purchase, it must be made payable to the exchange company.
Okay,
So you're not receiving any of it.
got it. So it has to be out of your accounts. It can't be in your name. It has to be a third party.
It has in the exchange company.
Okay,
Okay, so you either sell it for cash comes in and we assign it to that individual, or in your offer, you place that $1 million note in the purchase price for the purchase. If they accept it, then we assign it over to the seller.
now let's talk about the scenario where you keep the promissory note. You have the funds, the $1 million in the intermediary account,
Yes.
right? And you look to purchase your upleg or your replacement property. Now, by law, you have to buy something of equal or greater value on not only the value of the property, but the note that you might potentially have on it as well, correct?
Right.
Okay. So if you were to buy a replacement property, it would have to be $2 million or above, and basically you would have to come up with the remaining equity or loan to meet that requirement, right?
Yes.
Now, what happens if you don't? Let's say you only find $1.5 million property. What happens then?
Well, if it's a partial exchange,
Uh-huh.
you would have to pay boot
Mm-hmm.
on whatever portion you do not use.
Now, boot is a term for a taxable liability. Now, boot, is that based upon your ordinary income or capital gains?
That's based on your capital gains, the amount that you do not reinvest.
Correct, because you can only do a 1031 exchange with investment properties or properties that fall under the capital gains category.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. So let's talk about other aspects of 1031 exchanges. Now, we've talked about the ability to actually be able to 1031 if you're carrying paper for a property, just making sure you follow the letter of the law. Now, how many days do you have to identify and close again?
45 days to identify from the closing and 180 days to get it closed.
Got it. And there is no flexibility to that, right?
Unless there's private letter rulings or extensions in disaster areas.
Got it. And we actually, I think, are on the tail end of one of the private letter rulings, which is the COVID-based ruling, right?
That was an extension. They gave an extension to the 45-day period to July 15th, which we are obviously through now, but they did.
So we're back to the 45-180.
Right.
Got
Exactly.
it. Okay. Now, it wouldn't really be for this area right here, but there is also an extension for flooding, correct?
Right. There's extensions for the hurricanes and what have you that are going on, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be some for the fires that are going on.
That's a great point.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
So the good news is yes, you can do a 1031 exchange while carrying paper for a prospective buyer of your property. Now, one thing, and just reiterating this, that was fascinating to me is you could actually use the promissory note and deed of trust as an additional form of payment for your new property.
Exactly.
But isn't that considered personal property?
No, because it's funds
Uh-huh.
that you haven't touched. It's funds that have come to the exchange company. It's in the exchange company is the owner of the money.
I
We still
see.
haven't touched it, and we just assign it over to them.
So the moment that you accept any principal and interest payments
Right.
from this loan, then
Right.
no good,
Okay.
right? You can no longer,
Right.
use that.
Mhm.
Fascinating.
That's why you make it payable to the exchange company.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good to know. So I'm just glad to hear that you can do that because in this environment right now, lending is very difficult. So what we're doing is we're finding alternative options on how someone can, potentially sell their property, carry paper, but still consummate a 1031.
Yes.
So let's talk about where the owner has carried paper. They've used the remaining portion to buy another property. Maybe they put in other money, fresh capital, or they received loans for it.
Mm-hmm.
When the note itself is paid off or when the principal payments are being paid down, is
Yes.
that a taxable event?
Yes.
Okay.
You're going to pay on the interest received, obviously, and you're going to pay on the principal received. That principal will be your gain.
I see. So once you start receiving principal, you're paying in essence boot or an additional tax for that.
Yes. So the principal you receive each year, you'll only pay the tax on that amount you've received each year.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. And then if there's a balloon payment, for example, let's say 5 years down the road or 3 years down the road, which is pretty common with these types of
Yes.
seller financing options, whatever remaining portion is going to be taxed as boot or capital gains at that point in time.
You got it.
I see.
Yes.
So that's one way to really reduce that taxable liability or at least split it up.
Split it up. It's not such a hit. Yeah.
Fascinating. So let's talk about other aspects of 1031 exchanges that would be important. A reverse exchange. What is a reverse exchange?
Reverse exchange is where you find the property that you want to purchase before your relinquished property is in escrow or closed.
Okay.
In that case, you want the exchange company to take title to your purchase, or they could take title to your relinquished property.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, do you find that that is a common form of exchange, or is it a little bit more difficult, a little bit more costly? And traditionally, I'd have to say buyers and sellers don't prefer that method?
Definitely more difficult and more costly, higher liability.
Yeah.
If we're taking title to a property that's going to be rented, we're going to, the higher insurance, we're going to have to be named on that. in a lot of cases, because we're going to take title to the purchased property, you can't get a conventional loan on it. So you either need to be able to pay cash for it or get a loan from a private party, and then when your relinquished property closes, the money flows back through to pay back the money that we've essentially borrowed to purchase it.
Now, Geneva brought up a really good point about reverse 1031 exchanges, and that is that the property that you're looking to purchase to replace your relinquished property, most lenders don't like lending on that because of the fact that the borrower is not on title. It's the exchange company.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay. Interesting. So let's talk about, for example, partnerships or LLCs where we have multi-member interests in an LLC that owns a property. Are there ways to maybe cut ties with your partner, maybe, do like a seller carry in this case and what we call, I guess, a drop and swap?
So the problem with it is when you have an LLC and there are multiple members or a partnership, when you relinquish the LLC or the partnership, now your individuals are holding title, and there's a time period involved. There's a holding period. We have to tell you 2 years is a safe time period. CPAs may tell you differently, but I'm going to tell you that it's 2 years that you should be owning that property in your own name, away from the partnership or the LLC.
As a form of, let's say, tenancy in common, or a form of individual ownership not under the LLC?
Exactly.
Okay.
You're holding it in your own individual vesting for the amount of time that's required for an investment property.
Fascinating.
So,
okay.
There are people that deed out at closing and then do the exchanges, but we're gonna explain to you that there may be an issue.
And there's a certain risk tolerance that each investor has to feel comfortable with, because to Geneva's point, some CPAs might recommend a year, some others might recommend 2 years. It's just really, where you want to fall in the guise of risk tolerance in dealing with the IRS.
Exactly. Getting audited and having them saying, you did not hold it in your individual name for 2 years, so we're going to, or whatever it might be.
But that is another option for multi-ownership vehicles where it's under maybe one LLC through an S corporation, which is not common, but some sort of entity basically, where you're able to, in essence, drop the entity formation and swap it out with individual ownership, right? And then at that point, you can individually 1031 into another project without having to maintain the partnership.
Right.
Okay, I see. Let's talk about maybe some of the common pitfalls. What are some of the things that you see happen where you advise against it, it happens anyway, and then they get their hands slapped?
It's been pretty good.
Good.
So, yes.
Good.
We brought up the families, and there are private letter rulings that state if you're trading with your family that if you're not basis shifting and it's all up to par, that it's all good.
So what you're referencing is arm's length versus non-arm's length transactions, correct? Okay.
Yeah. So at first, when I came into the business, you could not exchange with family members.
Okay.
Now there's private letter rulings that have done the sniff test, and it all came out.
As long as everything is fair market, correct?
Exactly. Fair market and no basis shifting.
I see.
Yeah, so going from a real high basis to a low basis, and to avoid paying taxes accordingly.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Well, I know we covered quite a bit here, and I really appreciate your time. I think one last thing that I'd like to bring up before we close here is the issue of, let's say you've owned a property free and clear, no debt, we'll call it a $2 million property, and let's say you exchange that full $2 million into a new property, and within a year you decide to refinance out some equity to buy another property. Is that permissible?
I'm going to say you need to talk to your CPA, but I think after a certain holding period, you are fine to pull money out.
Correct.
If you do it too soon, I think the IRS may come back and say that you're pulling out your
And I think you're absolutely right. And I think that goes back down to the risk tolerance. You mentioned anywhere from a year to 2 years,
Yes,
to be careful about that, because talk to your financial advisor, talk to your CPA, because that could be considered boot as well, and you might get taxed on that.
Right.
So just be careful of that aspect as well.
Yes.
Fascinating. Well, Geneva, I really appreciate your time today, and thank you for all the insight.
Thank you for having me.
Have a good day.
All right.